Normally, when I do this series, I focus on a single game that I recently played with a lot of love behind it, but I recently cleared out a whole bunch of shorter games from my backlog and didn't really feel like separating them out into their own videos. Instead, I'm going to cover them all in one bonanza of short indie darlings where I examine them from my position as someone late to the party and assess if they live up to their hype. The games we'll be looking at today are Journey, the one game that will probably raise questions about its inclusion due to its connections with Sony potentially disqualifying it as an indie. But it is a short arty piece that feels more at home with the indies of the world than with Sony's big blockbuster titles, so it counts in my eyes. It's the 2012 game about a wanderer in the desert heading towards a distant mountain, and that's the entire concept. You probably know this game already. It's quite beloved. And then there's Cuphead, the run-and-gun shooter about a cup-themed cartoon character battling a series of wacky opponents in a series of tough boss battles. And also another potentially ambiguous indie, since Microsoft did support this one, although not quite as closely as Sony's involvement with Journey. I had also played a bit of this prior to my recent push to get through it, but I didn't get too far at the time, so it counts for this video. Next up, Donut County, an acclaimed game about a raccoon who delivers donuts to citizens of a small city, where those donuts are holes in the ground that pull in everything around them. It's very weird. And finally, Return of the Obra Dinn, a title that's been endlessly praised for being a solid mystery title, and to reveal too much is to be spoilery. What I will say is, you're an investigator on a ghost ship that's returned with all its crew missing, and using a magical stopwatch you can flash back to the moments of crew members' deaths in order to piece together clues around everyone's fates. All of these were relatively short experiences that I got through quickly recently, but what did I think of them all? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Starting with Journey, the first thing that hits you is just how beautiful it is. A long rolling desert with a few landmarks and a blazing sun staring down, it manages to make a normally drab setting pop, and it immediately makes it clear that this will be an audio-visual treat throughout, from the curves of the dunes to Austin Wintory's gorgeous score. Those limited landmarks also work in its favour as they turn a wide open space into something that urges you forward, as something always appears on the horizon calling you towards it, and if you ever get lost, just look up at the big prominent mountain and head in that direction. It's a superb way to keep the player oriented without a HUD or any on-screen text. Much has been made about Journey's soft multiplayer elements where another player can join you and accompany you throughout the game. Due to how late I was playing this, I wasn't expecting to encounter anyone. But then this guy showed up and we actually hung out for a huge chunk of the game. And it was a wonderful experience as we just talked to each other with a little symbol thing in the game. We'd heal each other up and then we'd guide each other to hidden places where necessary. And then eventually this friend had to leave and I just felt sad. I wanted to keep my buddy around. And then this happened 2 more times, although more briefly. And every time there was a bittersweet feeling as the joy of having a buddy was met with the sadness of seeing them leave. It was a really simple thing, but getting alerted by my fellow player to a little power-up or swooping around keeping our jump meters topped up was just one of the most wholesome gaming experiences that I've ever had. More of this, please. Less wholesome, however, was Cuphead, which is the polar opposite difficulty-wise. That said, there is a lot to love about the game. As a run-and-gun shooter, it is incredibly fluid, with Cuphead's jumping and shooting all feeling satisfying and responsive. And when you can nail a parry on any pink obstacle that comes your way, man, that feels good. But more strongly, the main thing I loved about Cuphead was its presentation. As a fan of classic animation, getting to play a living, breathing version of those old cartoons was wonderful. Every animation is suitably goofy and over the top, and character designs are always unique and bizarre in all the best ways. The animation nerd in me is absolutely in love with all of this. It's even little touches like projector noise filters and lo-fi samples of speech that make this feel like a project that somehow escaped the 1920s and became a video game. It's excellent. Speaking of games with great art styles, Donut County excels in this area too. Vibrant and bold in all the best ways, this minimalist style makes a simple raccoon model feel expressive, and the bizarre cast of characters always catch me off guard in a good way. A lot of time and care has been given to making all of this stand out, and I love it. It also evokes Katamari Damacy, with the hole getting bigger with every item placed in it. The sheer chaos you can cause throughout the game is deviously fun, from swallowing up a bonfire that becomes a warm-up draft, to turning the hole into a cannon. The inventiveness on display here is always entertaining. And this inventiveness extends to the utterly bizarre and hilarious storyline, where a raccoon's complete lack of understanding of the donut business leads to an entire town ending up underground. And all because he wanted a quadcopter. You know, standard stuff. And our final game, Return of the Obra Dinn, consumed my mind for several days while I played it. I heard it was a great mystery game, but what I didn't expect was just how absorbed into that mystery I was going to get. Look, I've always loved a good mystery, and I enjoy piecing together puzzles. I like to tax my brain wherever possible, and Return of the Obra Dinn delivered on that for me. The central concept is fascinating, where every clue you can find comes from a snapshot of someone's death. This limited interactivity with the world enhances the mystery, as every element of the world has to be studied intensely in order to find the information you need. And because you don't get to see every event, there's a lot of missing information that you've got to work around. And in a rare move for video game mystery titles, it does not hold your hand to gently guide you to the solution. It just lays out all the evidence and then asks you to notice the connections. The only feedback you get is when you find 3 solutions where the game will lock them in for you. But you do have to put in the work to get those solutions. And let me tell you, I was determined to find every single clue possible and piece all this together. The act of figuring all of this out was just a huge thrill. It was a deeply layered narrative that I enjoyed piecing together, and now all I want to do is play more like this. Journey is a magical experience that did a lot to warm my cold, cynical heart, but it's also an incredibly short experience. I beat the whole game in a single sitting, less than 2 hours, and I got to the end. It's also an incredibly limited game, with jumping and sliding down dunes being most of the interaction you get. But while these are shortcomings, I also can't see a way to change this without killing the fundamental elements that make the game what it is. Extending the length could make it outstay its welcome, and its simplicity is part of the charm. It's certainly one of the elements that makes the multiplayer component so compelling, as it really is just you and another person distantly connecting for a fleeting moment, which is almost certainly the subtle theme the developers were going for. The vagueness of the game might also put some people off, but then again this is a critically acclaimed darling that still gets spoken highly of 9 years after release, so maybe I'm hilariously wrong about this. In Cuphead's weaknesses, it was designed to be a hard game, but man does that make it hard to fully like it. There are times when this difficulty is reasonable and allows you to improve, but then there are plenty of encounters where a sudden attack throws you off so badly it can ruin an entire run of a boss. It's a throwback to the old days where games were hard, and by that I mean they would throw arbitrary stuff at you so you couldn't play through the entire game on a rental. We've thankfully moved on from this, but Cuphead sometimes leans too far into this territory and makes it feel a little trial and error. This also makes Cuphead frequently a repetitive slog at times. I haven't finished the whole game, but I also struggle to sit down and play it in long sessions because I easily get tired of looping the same boss fights and dying every time a new phase appears, because it launches something unexpected at you. It gives me a real love-hate relationship with the game, as I appreciate the challenge, but sometimes it's just too much, if that makes sense. But I adore everything else about it, so it's frustrating. Donut County kind of has the opposite problem. It feels too easy, and for a very specific reason. Every level has a prescribed way of doing things that you have to go through, and while that's often fun, it doesn't encourage experimentation, and it feels limited as an experience. The game feeling like Katamari merely highlights the problem. After all, in Namco's series, it's not always possible to collect every item in a level, and it's often a challenge to get certain items in your collection. The levels are much more freeform and encourage experimentation and exploration. You have to find creative ways to optimize increasing your ball size. Donut County is the opposite. A level doesn't end until you put every item into your hole, and often there's a set order in which those items can fit in your hole. You can't figure out new and unexpected things to do with your hole. And please stop giggling, I can hear you, this is a serious review. The game is also incredibly short, clocking in at the same 2 hours as Journey, but its linearity means that replays aren't going to be all that interesting. It ultimately feels like a concept that didn't know where it was going to go long term. Obra Dinn, meanwhile, did know where it was going to go long term, which was great, but sometimes got a little too obtuse with the player at times. Some clues are tiny details you wouldn't think to consider, some feel like guesses even though you did pick up on the right detail, and some details can be a little hard to discern thanks to the game's art style. The visuals are lo-fi, which is great from an aesthetic standpoint, but not so much when you need to identify people by their shoes or realise the man is Indian from his facial features. Sometimes these visuals can be eye-searingly uncomfortable to look at too, especially with some of the screen tint options which seem designed specifically to damage your retinas. Also, the hyper-specific nature of its mysteries mean that once it's over, and replays aren't going to be as compelling, which is unfortunate, and it left me wanting more. Out of the 4 games, only 1 failed to live up to what I expected. The other 3 absolutely did live up to their respective hype. In order of my preferences, Return of the Oberdin was a masterpiece, a mystery that got me obsessed to the point where I almost set up a conspiracy board. Oberdin scratched my puzzle solving itch so bad I found it hard to stop playing. Even with some of its more obtuse elements, almost every solution resulted in a reaction of course, it's so obvious now from me once I figured out everything that was right in front of my face. And so many of its reveals were shocking in the best way possible, and piecing together the story just from the bits where people died was a fascinating storytelling device that may warrant a chapter select episode someday. Oberdin has fast become one of my all-time favourites, and I'm sad I didn't jump on this immediately at release, because this is exactly my type of game. Journey was also superb. I'm very hit and miss on vague, arty games, as some end up being emotionally powerful, but more often than not end up kind of meandering and weird. Journey is the former, and is easily the best of this kind of game that I've played. So many moments like soaring through the clouds or the long desert slide were magnificent in how flowy they were, and the world was always gorgeous. But it thrived on its co-op elements, where suddenly a friend appears and you just want to hang out with this fleeting stranger for as long as possible. If only playing with random people online was always this wholesome. Cuphead is excellent too, although as I said, my frustrations with its difficulty mean I can't play it in long sessions, and I wish there was more cohesion between the run and gun levels and the boss fights. But I cannot deny its art style and soundtrack are some of the best in the business, and child me would be freaking out that such a game exists. I love classic animation, so this presses all the right buttons for me. One day, I'll finish you, Cuphead. I love you, but I hate you at the same time, and judging by how you treat me, I'm sure you feel the same way. And then there's Donut County, which I found disappointing. All the trailers and promo gave the impression it was a new Katamari-style game, but the final product is much more linear than Keita Takahashi's Bonkers Ball game, and it's sad. There's so much inventiveness on display in Donut County, but it ruins it by making it all feel heavily scripted. Would have preferred a greater emphasis on experimentation that encouraged replayability, because while the writing and art style were excellent, it fell short as an overall experience for me. So there we have it, 4 indie games that I finally played after a lot of hype and anticipation, and for the most part all enjoyable in their own ways. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know your thoughts on these games in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe too, and I'd like to say a big thank you to my patrons whose names you can see on screen, and you can join them if you follow the link in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.